Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Home and Away, a podcast devoted to all things in and around the world of sporting Kansas City soccer. My name is Drew Vanderploeg. I'm joined once again, as always, by my good friend Cody Welton. This week on the podcast, well, we whined about it enough last week that the powers that be in the sporting Kansas City front office decided to throw us a bone. After going the entire month of January and completing the addition of one whole player, we got the wonderful news this week that twice that many players have been added to the roster. Everyone can rejoice. We'll, of course, ignore the fact that it is simply two of the three trialists that came to the first phase of camp and are essentially warm body signings because the team literally cannot field a 20-man roster on February 21st as it stands currently. I guess they could if they roster 4 goalkeepers. So pay no attention to that detail whatsoever. In other earth-shattering news around the club, during this extremely noteworthy and not depressing at all offseason, Sporting Kansas City, too, has a head coach again after promoting their U18 academy coach to the job. Cool. And reports are coming in that team has its first addition to that roster in a kid who wasn't even alive when the club rebranded. So really riveting stuff going on right now, and I can understand why everyone is super excited for that season opener on the 21st. Given the level of sarcasm and snark that you hear there and what you've heard from us lately about the state of the roster and the speed of this rebuild, we decided to take a suggestion from the Discord and talk through our own principles of how we would be going about rebuilding this team and get it back to the levels of success we've become accustomed to seeing. The Soccerwise crew had Bobby Warshaw on again, leading a discussion in this vein, as he often does during his day job consulting for professional clubs. And I thought it'd be a fun opportunity to sort of put our money where our mouth is and also sort of make it a little bit more specific. That conversation on Soccerwise is a little bit more in the abstract. This can be a little bit more specific and real because we are fans of a club. You and I are podcasters covering a club that is very much in a state of rebuild and very much kind of, at least prior to hiring David Lee, was asking these exact same questions. So I think it'll be a good opportunity for us to, again, put our money where our mouth is regarding our criticism of the current state of the club and kind of how we go about addressing it. But first, we will, of course, cover this news of the week, which did include the signing of these 2 trialists to first-team contracts, left back Jaden Reed, formerly of Pink Dog Food SC, and Wyatt Meyer, a central defender that most recently played for Nashville. Cody, of course, I have made my thoughts pretty transparent with the nature of my introduction, but do you have any thoughts about these signings of consequence?
I immediately slotted both of these signings in as backups in their respective positions. And in fact, I have Meyer as the 4th center back after James Miller and Bartlett on my own personal depth chart. So that's a kind of an indication as to, sort of where I see them. I have Reed behind Basong as well at the left back spot. So I'm
but does it matter? Like,
no,
like, honestly, like,
it doesn't matter.
I mean,
it doesn't.
Beyond Jansen Miller, is there a center back on this team that you would be comfortable starting 20 games this year?
No.
So who cares?
Like, essentially, right? Who cares? They are literally, you nailed it. They are warm bodies. They are people to fill a roster spot. And not even necessarily from anything I've heard or you've heard, high upside, roster spot fillers. It's literally just some dudes.
They've both been on MLS teams for like 3 years. Like, if the upside was coming, we would have seen some.
One would think
potential of it.
One would
now.
think. So it really just feels like, oh, we need at least some depth on the roster to start the season. And this whole thing just reeks of like building the airplane as you're screaming down the runway trying to get off the tracks. And that is even overselling it. It's because there's like no plane, and we're just like tacking a few pieces on here and there, and the season starts in 3 weeks basically, and the roster is, it's not in a state of rebuild. It's in a state of unbuild. It's shambolic. It doesn't exist. It's a joke. And as Chad Reynolds has said multiple times, it's the worst roster in MLS, maybe in MLS history. And there's nothing being done to juice it at all. It's just bizarre to me. And it's at this point, it's just aggravating and frustrating, and the fact that my season ticket payments are basically all done now, and I've paid for the joy and the opportunity to watch whatever the fuck this team is going to be go out on the field and try and salvage some respectability. It's really aggravating, and it makes me feel helpless as a fan. And I at least have a podcast where I can bitch about it, and a lot of fans don't even have that. And I can totally understand that. And it sucks, man. It really, really, really sucks.
I'm in this like weird place where like I think your point is valid. I think I said this to you before we started recording. I'm not sure it's David Lee's job to be concerned about whether season ticket members are getting value out of their ticket investments. Like his job is to put a competent team on the field, which he is failing at doing so far, right?
Yeah.
I mean, candidly, as of the current state of the roster, he has not met that charge to put a competent soccer team on the field. There are 3 weeks left until actually, no, there aren't. There's 17 days left. Jake Davis days left as we record this, until the season starts. Maybe by April, this looks differently. I don't know. But as it currently sits, this is not a complete team by any stretch of the imagination. Not only is it not a complete team, it is so incomplete that most national media can't even make sense of it.
No. And I would imagine like a team this incomplete makes squad building even harder to some degree, right? Because you're not trying to balance a squad against, balance incoming players against known commodities on the field. You're practically starting from square zero, and that, I mean, obviously that's making Lee's job harder than maybe he thought it was, because we're we're 7 players away from a double-digit signing offseason, right? 7 players. That's and those were his words. That was his promise. Double-digit signings was his promise, and we are a long, long way away from that.
Yeah. And it's hard to see how we're going to get there. Maybe after the summer window.
We have there's no backup to Joveljic. Joveljic gets hurt. Daniel Shallowy at center forward. Steven Afrifa. I don't know. Manu Garcia gets hurt. I mean, we know that's a fucking disaster. Like it's just like. It's just so threadbare when you look at this roster and the depth chart. It's really astounding, and I don't know where the club is supposed to go. I don't know what fans are supposed to think. I don't know how fans are supposed to be at all excited or hopeful of this upcoming season, because the longer this plays out, the longer the can gets kicked down the road, the more it seems like we're going to have another sack of shit wooden spoon season. And the prospect of that just,
I mean,
sucks.
Cody, we're already there.
I
mean, we're already there without some unbelievable turn of events over the next month. We're already there.
Well, I mean, so the good news is there's always like DC, right? Like there's always clubs that are
DC
gonna
actually signed reasonable MLS players, as well as they made some DP signings that are. DC United is always going to spend an absurd amount of money on the weirdest DPs.
Yeah.
Although they did, I mean, they've also signed some really good DPs, but never really did anything around them. Yeah. I remember when they had Wayne Rooney and Lucho Acosta.
I do.
Also were DC United, so everything else was like whatever.
Falling apart.
Christian Mateke, who was one of the best scoring center forwards in the league over the last 2 years, but also were DC United, so
Right.
they had Mateus Click, or sort of had Mateus Click. So like they have a history, and they've gone through multiple CSOs with the same history. So yeah, maybe that's true. I don't think on the basis of looking at just rosters and rating rosters as they currently sit, Sporting Kansas City has by far the worst roster in the league.
Yeah.
By a sizable margin.
Yep.
We're not talking about, oh, Montreal exists, so maybe it'll be okay.
No.
This is the worst in the league by a wide margin. And I think you made a point before we started recording. The problem is that it is crickets as far as what's being done to address it. Like literally crickets. There's no news whatsoever. Like it is even more locked down than it was when Vermees was in charge. And even less action.
Yeah.
Which is just, I mean, I was one of the people that was very excited when David Lee was hired, and I want to be clear, and I've had this conversation offline with Zach Cobb, and I know that he's brought it up, and I know Leanne has brought it up in the Discord as well. I think that this is going to turn out okay in the long term. I really do. I do think that the right decisions are being made as far as structurally how to make this club better. But man, it is gonna be rough. For a little bit. And I think we all even sort of believed at some level that when Vermees left, it was going to be tough because it was going to like just rebuilding building a regular front office that operates like most clubs do was going to take time. And there was too many things being done by one guy. And it was going to be tough. And I guess like in my mind, I accepted the fact that was going to happen, but I really wasn't as prepared as I thought I would be.
Yeah.
And also, you expect when you spend 6 months getting David Lee hired that he's going to be a little bit more functional. Like, if they had hired some non-MLS CSO that didn't know what he was doing and they had none of this staff and all this, I could sort of understand it. But you're talking about a guy that's been a CSO for 6 years, understands the concepts of how to recruit and build out a team. And you would have expected that would actually shorten the window for how long it would take for them to start making moves. Yeah. And it hasn't. It has not.
Yeah. And that gets back to the point that the silence from the club and I think it's logical to make the assumptions that you've made, but there's no addressing them. There's no, oh, well, we're trying, or things are, at least Vermees was coming up saying, we're trying to punch above our weight and, missing on signings and blah, 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 whatever. Like there's none of that happening right now. It's just, we're just left to wonder, is there a sign of life? Is something going on there? Is someone trying to do something? Because the season's like ready to start, man. And this is a team that's not going to be competitive at all.
Yeah.
Even against clubs like Montreal. I mean, it's, the thing is, it really also makes, the job of the coach that you just hired, I think, a lot more difficult than it has to be. What is Wiki supposed to do with this roster, right? How can you implement a game style, a style of play, any of that stuff? How can you do that when you don't even have a full roster, not even close to a full roster? And so, like, there's like, you can't press because you don't have enough people to pull that off. Are you coaching your team to bunker and counter to give you a little bit of a chance at being competitive? Like there are knock-on effects to this lack of movement with the club that's on the field and the coaching job that Wiki has to do. And in terms of establishing a culture, in terms of all of the things that they've said that are goals for them, this, like, it just puts further and further and further back, right? It's not just the roster build. It's not just having players on your team. It's all of the other things that accompany it to build a well-balanced, competitive football team, and none of those things are happening right now. And so the idea that it's going to magically start to happen once the season starts is absurd, right? This is preseason. This is when this stuff is supposed to be happening, and when these strides are being made. But a little bit, obviously on the field, but obviously off the field to a major extent too. And that's not happening, and it doesn't have the potential to happen as long as there's no players for the coaching staff to work with.
I think it's also just to your point about it getting pushed further down the road. This is a fan base that has heard that told to them for reasons for the better part of 2 years now.
Yep.
So first it was, I don't have any money, and now I have money, but it's going to take 3 windows to fix it. And then, no, I actually meant the next 3 windows. And, now the coach is fired, so throw all that out the window. And we're bringing in a new CSO. That took us 6 months. I mean, and this is me sort of regurgitating a lot of Matt Demblein's points, which are valid. Like, I've never meant to try to dismiss them as valid. I was just waiting for action or lack of action to be clear. Right. Before I try to evaluate. And the lack of action has reached a point now where you cannot say that it isn't lack of action. Maybe it's failure to act. Maybe this is a Mike Burns problem. I don't know. I really don't know. And that is part of the issue with trying to evaluate all of this, is because nothing's being said. There is no external information. We have a new CSO who believes even less about sharing information with the fan base than the previous one. And you're just left, just as a fan of this club, you are just left just sort of like the John Travolta meme. I don't know. What happened?
Yeah.
Where's my team?
Yeah.
What am I supposed to do next? And I mean, I do agree with the sentiment at some level that being a fan of a team doesn't mean you're only a fan when they're good.
Sure.
This is a 30-team league. We are going to talk here in a minute about, goals and how you like look at what a team is going to be over a 5-year span and setting appropriate goals. And in a 30-team league with as much parity as MLS has because of the salary cap, the expectation of success is not really realistic, right? Like you have to be thoughtful about that. And you can't just decide, I'm out on this team because they were bad for a couple years. Right. I agree with that mindset. But also, for the fans that are willing to sort of sit through this, you got to throw them a bone. You can't just sit there and go, well, we're bad right now, and this is what happens to sports teams sometimes. Deal with it.
Yeah.
Like that is not a cooperative relationship with your fans who fund everything you do.
Right.
And I like I said, I made the statement earlier, I don't believe David Lee is meant to be personally responsible for fan engagement, but he is responsible for putting the team on the field that makes fans want to be there.
Yep.
And at some level, he's got to have a relationship with Jake Reed where they're like, hey, yeah, I know you've got shit to do, and maybe some things didn't work out the way you wanted, but we can't just dismiss the fan base. That's not acceptable. We have to, at least at some level, interact with them. And
well, I'm just going to say that like I feel like the way this roster is being handled, I feel dismissed as a fan. Like I do, and because you know what,
if you care about soccer at all, like this is going to be a trash soccer team.
I do not want to go out to the park when it's fucking cold and I got to drive an hour one way to get there, and I got to sit there and watch a starting 11 of Jovic, Saloui, Harris, Manu, Davis, Bartlett, Basong, James, Miller, and Reynolds, and Pulskamp. Like I don't want to go watch that team. Do you know what I'm saying? Like right. I barely want to watch that team from the warmth and comfort of my fucking couch. I don't want to go out to the park to watch that team. I don't want to pay more money on concessions and whatnot in service of that team. Like that is not where my mind is right now. I want to be entertained, and I want to be entertained by a team that is competitive and interesting. And this is not it.
Yeah. I can't debate any of those things. I'm not suggesting anyone should feel, and everyone's going to have personal opinions about whether they feel like they should or should not do that. I can tell you, I'm a Tottenham Hotspur fan. It is not fun to watch them play soccer. I turn it off a lot. I do.
Yeah, no, I know you do. I know.
And then, of course, somehow they, figure out how to score a couple goals in the second half and turn it into a game against City like they always do. But, I mean, there are a lot of times when it is, like, I think I said on Blue Sky, it's like watching Tottenham Hotspur try to break down a bunker should be against the Geneva Convention. So, like it is not a fun team to watch play soccer a lot of the time. But I've also, part of being a Tottenham fan is the loathing that comes along with it. Unfortunately, it's just sort of like part of your identity when you are a fan of that team. So that's like
it's much like being a Mizzou fan, honestly. So
it is. I mean, you would think Matt Demline would be familiar with this feeling. Then, like, this would be something he would be.
He is. I think that's the problem. He is. That's why he was so quick to push back. He's like, no.
So I think that. I mean, the difference is I will watch this team every week, even if I understand people who won't. But I will, because and that is kind of, and I will hope to find something positive to take away from that experience. And if there is nothing positive to take away, I will tell you all about it the following Wednesday.
For real.
But it's unfortunate, and it's just a bummer. Like, usually at the beginning of a season, you are filled with some level of hope.
Yeah.
And I think the thing that has really sort of kicked us all in the teeth is the absolute lack of it.
Yep.
You can't look at February 21st and go, man, maybe this will happen.
No.
That optimism is gone.
Yeah, there's no Calvary. There's nothing coming that's going to make this, significantly better.
Right. And that's a tough place to be as a sports fan.
Yeah.
And I mean, we'll have to see how it progresses. I mean, they have to sign more players. Maybe it's more trialists. Maybe it's more maybe it's more just a guys off the MLS free agency trash heap. I don't know, but they have to sign more players just to competently play a game. Like, to your point, they don't have enough players. Like, they have 20. Mike Kuhn made it clear they no longer qualify for a hardship loan from the twos. So they have enough players on the roster that they don't qualify for that. But the 20 on the roster includes 4 goalkeepers.
Right.
So they have 16 field players on the roster. That means that means 10 outfield, and then you have 6 subs.
You know who would be the perfect coach for this? Peter Vermes.
True. he would not have to make subs.
Nope.
He would only make 1. It's perfect.
Uh-huh.
That joke's been used a lot. It's not actually true.
I know.
Vermes actually, if you look at some of the best Sporting Kansas City seasons historically, it has some of the widest spread across the top, 13 players in minutes.
Yeah. So much like Wilfred Nancy, he did use his roster, but he, as you sort of mentioned, it was only like 13, 14 deep, right? And when we get into the talking about, club building and pillars of a club and that sort of thing, I have things to say about that. But that is an approach, absolutely. And some coaches use that approach to good effect.
But no one had over 2,500 minutes either. So right. He balanced it. He did balance load. It was different. You're right. It was only 13 or 14 deep, and it was more in the starting lineup where he rotated than it was necessarily with substitutes and trying to change games with substitutes. So that is where some of that comes in. But Vermes, like, making it seem like Vermes was reticent to use more than his starting 11, I think is a little unfair. But that said, you're right. He did have a smaller squad with which he trusted. right, than other coaches do, and that is part of the roster building conversation. Okay, let's move on to the last couple pieces of news. Sporting Kansas City 2 has a head coach. It is noted father of recent homegrown signing Chelo Tashantret, Lee Tashantret, who has been the U18s coach for the last couple of years, has been elevated and promoted to become the SKC2 coach. My first thoughts on this, and we talked about this a little bit on the Discord. There was some question about, like, is this a progressive enough signing? Is this, like, trying hard enough to get a good coach for the twos? I am of the opinion that the second team has been run incorrectly for quite a while, maybe even since its inception, and it was Swope Park Rangers.
Yep.
That team was run as a professional team that was trying to win games.
Yep.
And so they were signing players to second team contracts that were not developmental players in any way, shape, or form. They were like, mid 20-year-old, not good enough for MLS pros. When it was Swope Park Rangers, they were first division USL. Now we're at like D3 or first division USL, which is D2 in the soccer pyramid. Now they're D3, and we're still doing that. You still see them signing a lot of these sort of like 22, 23, 24-year-old soccer, maybe college cast-offs or something of that nature, and like trying to build a roster in that way. And they did start last year kind of moving away from that direction. And I think this is a continuation of that. My opinion, the second team should be the first step to pro minutes for the academy.
Yep.
That is what it should be.
100%.
And you should be using that to get Zamir Loyorenaga, who we're going to talk about here in a second, a lot of pro minutes in a pro environment against professional players taking a wage to play soccer. That is the point of that team. So that then you can bring them up on loans every now and then to your first team and get them first team minutes where they can see the speed of that game and start to adapt to that. If you're going to do that, it makes a whole lot of sense for it also to be a proving ground for your coaches in your academy system. And you're developing your coaches, and you're getting them A licenses, and you're moving them up as well and getting their quality improved. And you should also be using academy coaches that are familiar with academy players and how to develop them as your second team head coach. In my opinion, that should be the way that it's run. So I'm actually okay with this. I think it's fine. I think it's moving this team towards the goals that it should have had in the first place.
Yeah, I don't. There are so many more things that I'm more concerned about than this. I completely and totally agree with you about what the profile of the twos should be. I'm confused as to why it hasn't been that. Frankly, it doesn't seem. I mean, no
Premier League second team is operated that way. They even call them U21s or U19s for specifically that reason, because they're meant to be development areas for their younger players.
Well, and I thought that when they were rebranded as the SKC2s, I thought that was like. That was the demarcation, right? Like, okay, we're no longer, we're dropping down a level in USL or 2 levels, whatever it is, and we're no longer, we are going to be a developmental organization, and that's what I thought that change was. But then it kind of didn't work out that way. I don't know. I've said this before, and I'm a little out of the game now, so maybe I'm wrong, but I have always thought that there's a lot more talent in youth talent in this area than I think that Vermes specifically led people to believe, and I think that the only way that talent gets better is by playing them in high leverage situations, and so I am a fan of that approach 100%.
You have to develop talent to make it better.
Yeah.
Vermees was of the opinion that you had to earn the right to be on the field, which I think at some level I sort of understand, but also you have to enable them to be good enough to earn that right.
Right.
There's an enablement part of this. And if you are not giving them that framework by which, not only that, this is going to get into the conversation we're going to have here in a second about club building, but if you are not providing the structure that enables them to make that step, you fucked up.
Yeah. And
if you are actively inhibiting that from happening, you definitely fucked up.
Well, that's part of the problem. If the pathway from academy kid to professional player is not clear and not demonstrated, then kids lose sight of that, right? And there's
Well, not only
no
that,
incentive
but
for them to work hard and stick around and all of those things. Why would you do that when you can quit the club and go play for a USL team and then hope maybe for some European team to pick you up from there?
I mean,
like
that example is a little bit overplayed with
It is.
Bermuda. We talked about it on the Discord,
It is.
but I do think
But
that
it
there's a valid
exists.
point that you're there's a valid point that you've made when it comes to Vermees when he talked about the overall fertility of the youth soccer market in Kansas City as far as quality of play. And I'm sorry, man. You cannot tell me that at 13 years old, you know whether this guy is going to be a fucking pro.
Nobody
There's
does.
no fucking
Nobody
way.
does.
You cannot tell me that I looked at this guy at 13 or 14 and this one over here in Minnesota is way better. Why are we even trying? That's such horseshit.
Their youth system starts at U12. So these are kids who are 10 and 11 years old, right? And to first choose those kids like out of thin air or whatever, right? That's one step to identify that talent. But then the thing is you, especially when you're getting kids that young, you have to develop them, and it's like your job. If you're not getting players who are qualified to get first team minutes, that's on you, bro. That's on you. That's on you and your coaching staff. It's not on the pool of kids that you're dealing with. If you have those kids for 10 years and you can't instill in them, some sort of minimum level of soccer competency, like, you're bad at your job.
Right. I agree. We're not going to argue about this for sure. I think that
I'm just arguing with myself.
I think there are ranges, right? And there are ranges. Zamir Loya-Renaga, who reportedly has signed a homegrown deal that starts with the twos and then elevates to the first team next season, is an example of sort of the exception that disproves the rule. This guy was 14 and getting minutes with the second team. There are these unicorns, Kevin Sullivan and guys like that. Those do exist, for sure. But by and large, the players that you are going to turn into a $2 to $3 million sale to Europe when they're 21, you can't tell at 13 if they're going to make that step or not.
Nope.
You can, by and large, you cannot tell. The youth development is so non-linear.
Yep.
And is so reliant on environment that there's no way to be able to make that claim. And I do believe in Peter Vermees' ability to see talent in front of him. I believe he has a good eye for evaluating talent. I believe he has a poor eye for evaluating potential.
Yeah.
And I think that those are the difference that we're talking about here. And there's that is why we've historically struggled to see youth players really progress through the pro player pathway. As much as Vermees would like to talk about it being a pillar of his, he was not successful at achieving it. And I do think that we are going to start to see a change, at least in structure, about how that is managed. And I think that that's going to be a positive. And that's why you see Zamir Loya-Renaga getting a deal. He just turned 15 like a couple weeks ago. And I have on a fairly good authority that he is the real deal. Like, academy coaches are very high on him, and he had Mexican clubs sniffing around him too. So it was very important to get him signed to a deal because he has a Mexican passport. So, like, Club America was sniffing around him. Like, that's the level of talent that we're talking about.
That tiny
here.
Little club?
Yeah. That's the level of talent that we're talking about here. So it is a big deal, and at least something to get mildly excited about, even though he's probably not going to play first team minutes for several years. But it's good. It's good to see, like, at least some of these work streams starting to bear fruit. I think I've said this several times. Declan Yogi was hired 3 years ago? Mm-hmm. Right around now is when you'd probably start to see the benefits of that. It's just the nature of youth development. You can't make a change and then immediately see it, right? And I think we're starting to see the benefits of that. And I think adjusting the structure of the second team to be more in line with that development arc is a good thing.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I also, I don't know if this is a good place to talk about it, but I think that it was mentioned maybe in the Discord, and sort of dovetails with the other things that we were planning about talking about today, and that's the idea of using the twos as a place to develop U22 players that are brought in, and so. I think that is that's an excellent avenue that has not been used to this point.
Most MLS teams aren't doing it. Charlotte is one of the few that has been consistently successful at it. Part of it honestly is also convincing an 18 or 19-year-old player that you're paying a several $1 million transfer fee for, that it's okay that you're going to be playing with our second team for a little bit, right?
I'm pretty sure that Vancouver did that with like Pedro Vite or somebody like that. Like they they signed him, and they said, with the intention, they said, look, we're signing you for the first team, but this first season or this first half of a season or whatever, you're gonna play with the twos to get you up to speed, make sure. But we are invested in you. We're investing in you. We're paying you money. All of this stuff. You're going to start here and matriculate your way up, and that seems to me to be a really smart way to do it.
Yeah, he did not play any. I mean, they signed him when he was 18 from Ecuador. They don't FBref, and it's hard because of FBref's limitations and data. They don't. He has no minutes in 2021 for the Caps. I don't know if he played a lot for their second team or if he got loaned, or none of that is listed here. But that does make sense, right? And I think regardless of if Vite is a good example of this or not, we have seen it with other players.
Right.
And I think it's a good way, especially for international U22s or very young U22s, to put them in an environment where they can be successful, because candidly, most 18 or 19-year-old U22s that come from overseas are not ready for MLS. The league is fairly physical, and the league it's hard on the body with the travel and everything that goes along with it. And the speed of it is probably, I mean, I know a lot of people shit on MLS, but the speed of MLS is fairly good comparatively to a lot of the leagues these guys are coming from. The high upside South American, guys from Ecuador or something like that, they're not playing in a league like MLS right now. Yep. And as we're going to get to here in the conversation about squad building, coaches are often reticent to play players that are not of the level, right? And so it's a better place to bring them, to allow them to grow. I think the U22 mechanism is probably one of the more misguided ones that they've put in the salary rules of late. I think some teams have learned how to work around it. They've made adjustments to it with domestics on their second contract and such that have sort of expanded how you can utilize the U22 position, but for the most part, you're best off signing like a 21 or 22-year-old player as a U22 that has a little bit more on their belt than a younger one. And if you're going to do a younger one, the second team's a good place to stash them for a little bit. Yeah,
absolutely. And that's probably if you're signing an 18-year-old, Chilean winger who is good enough to get first team minutes with an MLS squad. There are probably a lot of European teams who are looking at that player as well, and probably also Brazilian teams that are looking at that player.
And there are going to be outliers to this. There will be the Jean Durans of the world that are going to be outliers to this. But
I think he's an outlier in many respects.
Right. I mean, and how much of a transfer fee that he went for, and then the transfer fee to Saudi Arabia. Don't get me started, but. There are going to be outliers to this, just like anything, and I think as we transition to this conversation about what your philosophy is for building a club, trying to chase that white whale is maybe not necessarily the best way to go about doing this. Like continuing to reload and like pull the trigger on like, hopefully I hit this 18-year-old that I can sell for $20 million.
Yep.
May or may not be the best way to go about doing this, and having a little bit more of a structured sort of ideology about how you utilize these slots, where, based on profile and age and where the player's coming from, that you think differently about how to putting them into places where they can give you value, where more of these players give you positive value instead of 1 out of 10 hitting for $10 million. Mm-hmm. I think that because you're still a net loss because you've paid $3 to $5 million for all of the others that didn't do anything for you. So I think that there's a way to go about that structurally. So let's transition to tactical corner, roster corner. It's been roster corner most of this off season in the last several months of the regular season. As we noted, Bobby Warshaw jumped in for another sort of episode of what they're calling Soccerwise-r, where he leads a conversation more philosophically about how you view an MLS team, how you view what good looks like and what you're trying to achieve. And Bobby being in a unique position to be able to do that in this circumstance, working for Bloom Sports, being a company that does participate in consulting in these types of environments for professional soccer clubs, and asking provocative questions to sort of help build a mindset for how your club means to operate. And there are 4 key questions that he brought up on that podcast. And I think Goss and Doyle did a pretty good job of sort of highlighting their personal mindsets of what they'd like to do. But again, it was mostly abstract. I mean, they created some comparisons to teams that exist in MLS to sort of give an idea of what they were going after. But they were not looking at an actual current club in their current state and what they would do if they were given that position. We are in a position where we can do that for a very specific club in a very specific state currently, and that is Sporting Kansas City. This is a club that has 2 DPs signed for the next couple years. It has a significant amount of middle roster spending flexibility. It has no U22s signed, and it has a need to build out a front office basically from scratch, build out a sporting architecture basically from scratch, and come up with a way to take this club back to the level of success that we had become accustomed to seeing, or at least the competitiveness for that level of success that we had become accustomed to seeing. So I wanted to frame this conversation more in that way, specific to Sporting Kansas City and what we see as potential opportunities about how we might address some of the problems that exist. But generally, the 4 questions that Bobby asked are: 1, what are your objectives for the next 1, 3, and 5 years? How are you measuring those targets, those objectives? How are you measuring success against those targets? What is your thesis on why you will be successful? Why is your philosophy going to enable you to beat the other 29 people trying to do the same thing as you? What are your roster pillars? What are the 3 to 5 things that you need to achieve with your squad to be successful in Kansas City? And then what are the categories of players within your roster? How are you defining them? How are you measuring them? Now, a lot of that does sound a little bit abstract, and a lot of it sounds a little, it's sort of open to the mind of the individual to interpret those questions the way that they want to. I have a lot of notes here, and I will chime in with my thoughts on them as we go, but I'm going to let you start. As you look at Kansas City as it currently sits, and hey, we do have 10 senior roster slots available. Well, I mean, I don't know if it's 10. It's maybe we just signed 2 players. So 8, let's call it 8 senior roster spots available. A couple of DPs signed, no U22s signed, and roughly, let's call it 8 to 9 million in middle roster spending available. That's in transfer fees and salary, obviously, because we're not talking about DPs. What would you look at when you look at the position of this club, you look at the front office and the state that it's in currently, and the academy and the youth and the pro player pathway and the way that it is, what would your 1 year goal be? What would your 3 year goal be and 5 year goal be?
So at this point, the 1 year goal has to be to start to build a competitive roster, and focusing on, I think focusing on building out data and focusing on measurables as much as possible. In 3 years, you want your club to be making the playoffs regularly, and
I'm gonna pin you down. Is that
home playoff games?
Home playoff games.
So
not ninth place,
right?
Is what you're saying.
And 5 years competing for multiple trophies, right? So let's in the conversation. So there's 4 trophies that are available for MLS teams to win every season. That's Conca Champions, Supporter Shield.
How do you measure competitiveness? So if you're saying I'm competing for one of those 4 trophies, how do you measure competitiveness? Reaching a certain stage of the tournament?
Yeah, quarterfinals, semifinals, absolutely. And
okay.
It's obviously it's a little bit different when you're talking about Supporter Shield, but you can be in the conversation, top 5, maybe Supporter Shield teams, that sort of thing. Like that should be the goal, right? I think trophies are silverware is absolutely the supreme objective, but in knockout tournaments especially, I just don't trust those, right? And I don't think that I think that if you're in the conversation competing for those things, then I think that is usually going to have to be sufficient.
This was always a thing about this conversation when I listened to it that I thought was difficult, because we're talking about specifics and measurables, and I'm going to have my own measurables. Mm-hmm. They're going to be a little bit more defined, because I do think that you're right that knockout tournaments are difficult to predict, but also it's hard to quantify a metric for hope.
Sure.
Right? Like, do we have hope of winning this tournament?
Mm-hmm.
Do we feel optimistic that we have a legitimate chance of winning this tournament? How do you measure that? When it comes to the Supporter Shield, it's a little bit easier, right? You know historically what the expected goal differential is of the teams at the top of the league. You know what their XG versus XGA needs to look like historically to be able to compete in the top 4 of the Supporter Shield standings. Those are measurables, and you can hit those measurables without hitting that top 4.
Absolutely.
But at least you can come back to that measurable and go, look, I achieved my goal here. We put a team on the field. We played well enough. Sometimes ball didn't go in and we didn't actually get to the level we expected, but all of the underlying numbers tell us we did the right things. Mm-hmm. Knockout tournaments are much harder to do that with, right? And especially in MLS. So that's a harder measurement to make regarding, Leagues Cup, US Open Cup, MLS Cup. I don't want to put a measurable like they did with a stupid high impact player where it's like, do all of the MLS media believe that we have a chance of winning, a chance of better than 10-1 to win the tournament? Right. Like, that's not a way to look at this, but I do understand the point that you're making. Well, so I'm not trying to diminish it. I'm just saying it's a difficult thing to measure.
Absolutely. And to sort of underline how kind of squishy the whole thing is like if you look at a team like Orlando, right? So by a lot of metrics, Orlando, you could consider Orlando a successful team that's sort of generally in the conversation for trophies, and they have a good expected goal differential. They're finishing towards the top of the toughest conference in the league, but like I would not be thrilled if I was an Orlando fan, right? Like that. So
some of that has to do with
it does.
I agree.
I have
both of us have a bias against Oscar Pareja,
100%,
which has a lot to do with that.
But that is Oscar Pareja. Like that's what he does, right? He is a floor raising coach, but he has never proven to sort of raise the ceiling significantly of the teams that he coaches. And so I don't know what to do with that, right? Yes, I want a team with a high floor, but it's got to have that top end availability also. And I don't know how to measure something like that.
I mean, they notably won the Open Cup in 2022. Remember,
Yeah.
that was the year that Sporting
Yeah.
lost to Sacramento
Yeah.
in the semifinals. They have trophies in the last 3 seasons. So there's something to be said about that from a success level. And I do want to sort of level set the success part of this conversation, because I think it was a noteworthy thing that Bobby brought up in their conversation, which was only 2 teams in the league have finished in the top 4 of their conference 4 out of the last 5 seasons.
Yep.
2 out of 30.
Mm-hmm.
So when you say home playoff game, is that getting out of the wild card and getting one of the best of 3 games, or is that like you're in the top 4?
So I built that sort of unknown element into that 3-year plan, right? Because I think that however you do it, if you're hitting that metric around 3 years, I'm okay with that, because you're sort of midway, right? There's a lot more to go, but at least you're not in spoon contention.
That's the point that I'm getting. Okay, so not in spoon contention, I think is different than home playoff game kind of thing, where traditionally we think of home playoff game as one of the top 4 seeds in the conference,
right?
And not only did only 2 get it 4 of the last 5, like 8 teams got it 3 of the last 5 out of 30.
Right.
It is fucking hard to get into those top 4 slots in the conference now.
Yep.
It is very hard. It's about to get even harder when there is no conference and we're in these like divisions.
Yeah.
And which does have some impact on how we look at this in the future. And so I've been when I looked at my measurements for success with the team, they're less related to standings and more related to performance.
Okay, why don't you go over your measurables and what they are?
My measurables are related to XGD.
Okay.
So because I think, and this was brought up on the podcast, and before it was even brought up, that was something that I've always thought about as far as like, how can I tell if this is working or not? Mm-hmm. And I think Wilfred Nancy got a raw deal at Celtic because his XGD was actually very good when he was the coach there, and it was just a very much ball don't go in. Now, granted, I understand the dynamics of why that had to change, and it did, but I think that if you are an owner, like the whole concept of this conversation is you are the owner of this club and you're setting the direction of it. If you're an owner, you have to stand on your principles. You have to develop this formula and you have to be willing to stand on top of it. Now, there are always going to be pivots one direction or another, kind of on the fringes and the margins of it, but you have to have clear things that you believe in. And one thing I'm very certain of is if you have a positive expected goal differential, you are going to be a playoff team in MLS.
Yeah.
Period. End of story. I know that for a fact. So I can look at that as a direction of success over the 1 to 3 to 5 year plan. So my goal is that we are developing, what was Sporting's XGD last year? It was like minus 20 something. I can't pull up FBref and look at it because thanks, Opta.
Yeah, doesn't that
But
suck?
it was fairly far in the negative, and it was like, I think, the worst XGD in the league last year. Like, again, the fact they didn't win the wooden spoon was a great, it was a positive. Not miraculous, but certainly they got lucky that they didn't win the spoon. They were the worst team in the league by XGD last year. And so what I'm looking for in the first year is to improve that, right? How do we take our XGD from minus 20 plus to minus single digits? What am I progressing this forward in a positive direction? Mm-hmm. In 3 years, we are above 0. We are 100% always having a positive expected goal differential. And then by 5 years, at least every other season, we have double-digit positive goal differential, expected goal differential. I think those are reasonable targets that can tell us whether things are working or not. Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
Okay. I'm trying to come up with ways where we can like check our work and go, hey, is this working? Is this not working? Yep. And I think that those are good ways for you to. Expected goal differential is a very simple model by which you can look at a team's performance and sort of dispassionately take away all of the results over a year and look at it and go, okay, well, yeah, some shit went the wrong way, but over a 34 game sample size, we actually hit what we said we set out to do.
You know when the last season was that Sporting Kansas City had a positive goal differential? Not expected goal differential, just a positive goal differential.
2018.
No. You went for a little further back than I would have. It is a long time. It's 2021. This is 2021. That's a long 2021. That's a long fucking time, man.
2021 was probably was that the last year that Gotti and Polito were healthy for at least a portion of the season?
That sounds right. Yeah. Man, it sucks not having expected goal differential.
It's in ASA stuff. You just got to get better at searching ASA.
Yeah, I find it very cumbersome. I have to get in and work with it.
Catabush put some VizHub stuff in that makes it a lot easier to look at. Right. So you just need to get more adept at using it. You get more, but she's done a lot of work to make it easier to visualize some of that information. At the team level as well. Like it's not FBref. It looks different and It doesn't have everything on the same page, but it does have the data there. All right. Thankfully. So that is me, like how I look at 1 to 3 to 5 years.
Yeah.
Like how, and it maybe somewhere in the middle is probably because when we get deeper into this conversation, I'm going to talk about like overvaluing data.
Yeah.
Like there, you can give yourself head fakes as well. In individual circumstances. So I think that, but I think expected goal differential over a full season sample size for a team is enough information to give you a reasonable view on kind of how that season went.
You know, one thing I'd like, someone to do at some point in time is sort of go back and dig around in Peter Vermes' career at sort of what the data said, the underlying data said about his teams and the success or non-success of his teams. Because, it just, and sort of anecdotally in the way that I'm thinking about it, a lot of his teams seemed to, a lot of the success of his teams seemed to fly in the face of a lot of things that are sort of accepted truisms in football data.
What's funny, so if you listen to the ASA pod that they did right after Vermes got fired, something that the guys talk about on that pod that I thought was really interesting was discussing how Vermes sort of hacked XG a little bit by doing the long shot stuff.
Yep.
And
and shot volume instead of shot quality,
right, right, because and if you think about it, like this came up in the conversation on Soccerwise as well. Bobby discussing like how do you if you add 0.1 xg, you increase your chances of winning by 7%.
Right.
So if you're hammering 25 shots a game, even if the XG value is low, but you aggregate it up to 2.0 over like what the average is 1.6, you have increased your chances of winning fairly significantly. So I do actually think that there was some stuff in there that he did that was outside of, it's certainly outside of the where goals come from conversation by ASA, but it was actually an interesting way to use some of that math to his advantage. And I think, so I do think that the guy is actually fairly interesting, kind of how he's gone about trying to find advantages in certain areas. I do think that Vermes is actually, he's one of those minds, sort of the Sun Tzu art of war kind of people. Like that is how his mind works. And so I do think that there's some interesting play. I think it jumped the shark towards the end, and he got a little high in his own supply, and just a lot of things sort of fell apart. Honestly, and we have litigated all those on this podcast.
If he would have just listened to this podcast and focused on set pieces, 3 years ago when we were beating that drum and saying like, look, if this team could only produce on attacking set pieces, they would never lose. They would be unbeatable. They would be the Sporting Kansas City could have been Arsenal. right?
One could say we were ahead of the set piece.
Yes,
The set piece.
I would say that
sort of evolution.
I would say that, but because it was just painfully obvious that his teams were so good at holding onto the ball and using the ball and that sort of defensive possession, that if only they could score like regularly from set pieces, they would have been unbeatable. They would have been such a pain in the ass to play against.
Especially because a byproduct of being a possession-based team is you are often given set pieces.
Yeah.
Right, like a lot of your possession ends in a set piece because everyone is sort of collapsed inside the 18-yard box, and you're trying to do entries and they ricochet out of bounds. So like it is very common to get like sporting like back in the day, like those 2021 teams that you're talking about from like 2017 to 2021, 2022. If sports betting was legal at the time, smashing the over on number of corners was like a easy bet.
Yep.
Easy bet with sporting. And so to your point, it would have been nice if they had thought about executing those corner kicks a little bit more effectively.
Just sign some players who were good at that. That's all they had to do. But whatever. Those days are gone.
Or just meat wall it like Arsenal does. Like, just throw the meat wall in the front of the goalkeeper and just make it a mess.
Love that.
It works.
Love the addition to the lexicon, meat wall.
The meat wall?
It's great.
Yeah. So we've discussed our targets. So how are you going to achieve those goals? And so you've said, you've got this sort of plan for you're looking more at like moving up the standings and then being competitive, play home playoff position and then competing for trophies. What is going to enable you to do that, and why is it going to make you better at it than others?
So my main focus would be building a team that was absolutely dominant at Children's Mercy Park, and because that is like if you win all your home games.
I'm gonna challenge you on that. How are you doing?
Yeah, I know.
Okay.
If you win all your home games, that's 51. That's 51 points, right? That is putting you right where you need to be every year. And so the adage, even going back 15 years ago, was you win at home, you tie on the road, you're going to be good to go. And I think that the best way to do that, my preferred way of doing that, I should say, is by building a squad that focuses on dual winning, physical aggression, and direct attacking play. Those are the things that I would prioritize in order to make that happen. And I would, and this is not like a measurable thing, but I want my club to be an absolute bully at home, and that is. That's really like I do kind of think in some respects it is that simple. If you solve that part of the equation and don't lose games at home, you're going to be in the mix every single year, every single tournament where you have the ability to play home games. You're going to be there.
I'm going to challenge you a little bit on this. Now, granted, it goes both ways as far as your road results as well. Nobody goes undefeated at home.
Right.
Nobody goes 17-0 at home.
But that's the goal.
It is the goal, right? So when you're looking at goals and targets, you're saying that you're more of the aim high, and it's okay if we get to 70% of that number. Like where does that threshold sit for you?
Yeah, I think that. Well, I mean, I think that if you aim for that, like winning on the, your home games and tying on the road. If that is your baseline goal, then and you get, I don't know, within 75-80% of that goal, you're going to be okay in terms of point accumulation every year.
Okay. I mean, the only reason I'm asking that is because I think at some level there needs to be a measurable of whether or not you're hitting targets. Yeah. Right. And so it's like, I think you can tell as a coach or a sporting director that's talking to players saying, we're going to win every home game. Sure, that can be the rah-rah conversation that you're having with the players. But realistically, you need to have a target of where you want to land. And so I think some percentage of that. Now, that said, you're not going to only draw every road game, right? You're not going to get just 17 points on the road. Although you could get less than 17 points on the road, to be completely honest. There will be some puts and takes there. So my thesis is that if you put together a balanced squad that is physically intimidating and plays aggressive front foot soccer, that you're unlikely to lose the majority of your road games as well as any of your home games. I think that is that is something that a lot of teams in MLS maybe don't take advantage of, and I think that is I think that especially when you go into different stadiums in a league that has a very sizable home advantage, I think if you're able to disrupt opponents by playing a very physically aggressive style, I think it I don't know. I think it goes a long way. And I should say that like I fought against myself in thinking of a team in this way, because there's a really strong part of me that wants to play like a very sort of possession based, I don't know, like Pep based kind of system, where you possess the ball, you use the ball. I mean, that's old Pep, right? That's not current Pep.
Well, yeah, and look how he's doing, right?
Well, but I mean, I think it's interesting to hear you say all this because it does belie the fact that you watch a lot of the Premier League.
Yeah.
And the Premier League is very much that type of game now.
It is, but it also dovetails with my ideas about player development and roster development through academies, which I think is I think it lends itself more to the kind of team that I have described.
Gotcha.
And so it's like a comprehensive picture.
Well, and it should be, right?
Sure.
We're going to get to the other bullets here, but it should all connect to each other.
Yeah. And plus that, like to be honest, like there's an element of it in that I'm speaking as a fan, and I love when my team is the home bully, and other teams and other fans are terrified to come to Children's Mercy Park, and they look it out on the schedule and they're like, we're not going to win that game. We'll be lucky to salvage a point from that game. Like that's what I want. And I really truly believe
there was a point when that was the
absolutely.
Case. And even in opposing players, the Kalen Carrs of the world that, played against Sporting back at that time knew what that was going to be like. And that was definitely where they were. I went in a slightly different direction on this when it came to like the concept of the question.
Well, that's one thing that we sort of learned from that conversation on Soccerwise-r is that there are lots of different ways to look at this, right? Like, it's not a one size fits all. We're not saying one's
right or wrong.
Sure.
This is more just like different thoughts on how this can be accomplished. It's an interesting way to go about looking at it, and I can see the direction you're going. I'm interested as we get to the other bullets, like how you build that out, right? Because I think that there are going to be some dependencies to be able to make that work. When I look at like why the thesis of why I'm going to be successful, it kind of goes back to a conversation that we've had in the past, and it's something we've discussed about a little bit about Inter Miami recently. My thesis on being successful is maximizing every avenue available to me to be able to add on-field success. So, and I mean that from the academy, like it is impossible to build a consistently successful MLS team without at least 4 to 5 homegrowns coming through your first team regularly.
Yeah.
That
Agreed.
can provide value on the field. Period. End of story. So that means investing in a pro player pathway and building out how those players are moving through the system, having a clear idea of what that development path looks like, what your targets are for those players as they move to different levels, and regardless of their age. Some 14-year-olds are going to play on the second team. Some 18-year-olds are going to stay with the U18s until they're ready. It's non-linear development arc, but having targets for what you're looking for in that development architecture and enabling it and understanding how to enable it for those players is going to be really important. So the academy and the homegrown system is a huge part of that. But also, it's understanding how to evaluate player performance effectively. Mm-hmm. You have, obviously data analytics is a huge part of kind of how I believe soccer needs to be managed in the current environment. We have too much information out there to not be using it. If you are avoiding using data as part of your decision-making architecture, you are failing. You are behind. So not only should you have a clear picture and understanding of a data model of how to evaluate a player, and be that internally or contracting it from a provider and understanding how to interpolate that data, as well as modify it with, in partnership with them to be able to get the information and the insights that you need. It is an integral part of how you go about doing this. And you need to have a robust player performance department that is using these analytics both to you're measuring your own player performance all the time, including all the way down through your academy, but also to evaluate players that you are scouting, that you are attempting to sign, and you are trying to attribute value to when it comes to bringing them into your club. And then maximizing every available avenue to you to build out a roster in the MLS architecture. There are so many different ways that you can maximize the efficiency of how you spend money in MLS, and that includes the academies, that includes data analytics, that includes scouting. There's all kinds of things that have no cap on them financially that enable you to be better at identifying players and signing them. And then additionally, there are all kinds of ways that you can manipulate player sales and the cap in order to give you the most flexibility possible to be able to sign the players that you need at the right point in time, and having the smartest people you can possibly have to be able to achieve that is really, really important. Mm-hmm. You and I have name-checked Megan Cameron on this podcast several times. I thought it was kind of noteworthy that Bobby name-checked her on their podcast.
More than once.
Because it is something, I brought it up several times.
Yep.
And I think that you can draw a line between when Megan Cameron left and when Sporting Kansas City went into the shitter about how their salary cap was managed, and when Miami became one of the best in the league at it.
Yep.
And you need those kinds of people to be able to be functional. And she was never replaced. And look, I'm happy for her that she got a promotion and got more money, and she's working in a place like Miami that actually enables her to do what she does so well. Good for her. That's not to say they couldn't have hired somebody else to bring in to achieve similar success at Sporting, or found someone that had similar capabilities. Maybe not as good as her, but at least capable. And so I think there are so many different avenues for player acquisition in this league. And I think Miami is probably the only team that I can think of that is close to maximizing all of them.
Yep.
And so for me, the opportunity to succeed outside of the other 29 teams is maximizing all of those areas.
Yeah, I totally agree. A lot of those points that you brought up, I actually sort of incorporated into the roster pillars. So I think that we're actually really on the same page with a lot of that stuff, which makes sense.
So let's go to your roster pillars then. So you have a team. I haven't really even talked about a game model on my team because I don't know that it's necessarily. I think I think I'm not sure where we're at in the conversation. Really, it really matters about what the team looks like on the field,
Right.
and I think also based on the coach and what we want to be as a club, that can evolve a little bit. But you kind of have an idea of what you want the team on the field to be like.
Right.
What, sort of industrious. Duel winning is something that you brought up.
Mm-hmm.
The ability to win duels also is the ability to see duels before they happen and get in front of them, right? So it requires a very specific type of player, both athletically and mentally.
Yeah.
So how are you going to go about building that roster? What are your pillars towards how your roster is going to be built out to enable that to happen?
So as you pointed out, like dual winning is prominent in my roster build, and along with that, these are not pillars. These are all sort of in the same, I guess, maybe game model. You might want to term it: direct attacking play, set pieces, duels. Those are.
So you want to win the Premier League, is what you're telling me.
So sure.
I'm
right?
messing with you, but
no.
yeah.
And one thing that I texted you about a couple weeks ago was I've been watching a lot of Crystal Palace. I find a lot of similarities and parallels between Crystal Palace and Vancouver and the way that they approach the game. The kinds of things that those two clubs prioritize are these types of things. And so those two things really stuck out at me. And yeah, I do watch a lot of Premier League, and in terms of like the being a home pitch bully, like I texted you this weekend that I love watching Newcastle, and I know they're not like collecting a lot of points this year.
I was gonna say Liverpool kicked the shit out of them this
week. They did, but especially when they have their full complement of players in the midfield, they are one of my favorite teams to watch. Even though they're not a very dynamic attacking team, they are an absolute bitch to play against. And one of the reasons that Liverpool found success against them this weekend is because out of Joelinton, Tonali, and Gamarish, only Tonali was playing, right? And like Tonali's a good player, right? There's a reason that Manchester City or Arsenal were rumored to be in for Tonali, but he's just one player. And it's like those three guys all together just are physically intimidating and dominant, and they just kick the shit out of teams, and they make it really impossible to play through the middle of the field, which is one of the reasons why Liverpool found success in this weekend is only one of those guys was on that field. So yes, those things absolutely play into it. And I will say that, like, just in my own thinking about the game of soccer, like, I do kind of gravitate more towards sort of like a 3-5-2 or a 3-4-2-1 type of system. I don't think that clubs should lock in systems. I think that, or from the top down, I think that that's a bad idea, as we, saw, Ruben Amorim prove, as we saw Peter Vermes prove, where you're just sort of so locked into to a formation and a style of play. So I don't know that I would limit a club in terms of that, but there are a lot of things to really like about that. And one of the things, and I'm kind of off the beaten path right now, but one of the things I like about that is that the use of wing backs, I think opens up a lot of options in the player pathway. I think the wing back position is a position that you could get a lot of American soccer players to play. I think that it a lot of the common requirements of that position in terms of fitness, in terms of maybe a limited responsibility for 360-degree awareness, those sorts of things, I think really sort of play into the kind of player pool that my team would be looking at. And so, like, I really like having that. I also like numerical overloads in midfield, and that lends itself to that as well.
That was where I was going to go with that conversation. When you talk about using using your wide positions, wing backs as your wide attacking positions versus wingers is a much more efficient way to spend your salary budget as well, right? If you're talking about using sort of domestic homegrowns that maybe came up as wingers or attacking players in, a Max Arfston is a really good example of this, that, sort of have migrated towards being a fullback / wingback type player. And Bobby talks about this a fair bit in the pod about how, your backup fullback should always be a homegrown of some kind.
Right.
Like, unless they're a homegrown striker, you can make them a fullback, right? And we saw this with Jake Davis, central mid to fullback, and we've seen this with other players, it just being a role that they can get to. But I also think from an efficiency of spending perspective, midfield overloads are where it's at. You should want those midfield overloads. Wide progression is out, right? Running, unless you're Thomas Frank running double stacks in the wide channels.
Yeah.
But for the most part, wide progression is not the way that teams move the ball forward. And so investing a lot of money, and it can cost a lot of money, as the guys discussed on Soccerwise, for those players, right? Like, if you want a really good winger, like, if you want a DP winger, it can cost you $10+ million to get that guy. Whereas if you're using wing backs and then spending your money on central midfielders instead, it's a much more efficient way to spend money, and you can maybe get a more useful concentration of quality on the field at the same time.
That's exactly what I'm thinking of, right? Is I'm thinking of using, sort of wingbacks as specifically a developmental spot, and saving money in those areas, and then, as you mentioned, spending money on central midfielders, attacking players to sort of turn the tide. I think that just sort of getting back to the pillars argument, like, I think I'm not a small or a small or limited roster type of person. I want a club-wide next man up mentality, and I think that's
probably going to be Bobby's most controversial take of that podcast, is the small squad thing, because I don't think many people are of the opinion that small squad is the right way to go.
I think that maybe not many general public, but I think a lot of coaches would be, honestly.
I don't think that they think that. Like, Vermees wanted 3 deep at every position.
Right, but he only used
right.
So
this is so their habits are different than what they say, right? Bobby legitimately believes that you're better consolidating all of your money into the players who will play the 90% of your minutes.
Yeah.
And I do agree with that at a certain level. But for me, it's more like the rest of those roles are actually filled with academy and homegrown players.
Yes.
Right. So, like, I think that there's a way for you to create depth. And that is where I agree with Bobby's mindset, that if you only have 13 or 14 that you've spent a lot of money on, you're forced to use the youth players in circumstances. You don't have that out where you've got a $400,000 a year guy available to fill in a hole, versus the academy player that you should be playing at that point in time, right? Like Tottenham has a ton of injuries right now. Byfield isn't playing right now without all those injuries, right? Because Thomas Frank is not putting him on the field otherwise. That is not how guys develop, right? You need to have a structure by which coaches are sort of forced to do this, because you can't believe them at their word that they're going to try to develop youth players.
Correct. Well, and I think that because of that, and because, like, next man up is a defining philosophy for my club, I think that I think it's wise to build in, just at the outset, the idea that you're going to churn your roster by probably 15 to 20% every season. Right. So you are, and that is switching out players at the top, and hopefully at the top, and also at the bottom of your roster, where you are ideally you're selling players at the top of your roster who you've developed, and who who are attracting interest from other clubs and from Europe, absolutely. But you're also dropping out players at the bottom of your roster who you've determined are not good fits. And so just building in that idea that every season.
How are you measuring that though? The who's doing well and who's not, and where the changes need to happen.
Well, so the who's doing well, who's not at the bottom of the roster, right? That happens in conjunction with the coach and in conjunction with the training staff, because the idea, right, is that you promote players to the first team when they're ready for minutes, and that you ease them in and give them minutes, and then you have objective, measurable things that they're accomplishing in those minutes to earn more minutes. And so you have within your club you have a well-defined player pathway for players entering in at the bottom of your roster so that they can work their way into the middle of the roster. But you also account for some loss at the top of your roster. Like I said, hopefully, right? The idea is that you can, have some players that you can sell on at the top of your roster, so that you're constantly expecting to have, anywhere between 3 and 6 new players every season.
Yeah, having it sort of built in that you're expecting a certain amount of turnover, and some of that will come with new homegrowns coming in.
Sure.
Some of that will come with signings. It's going to be sort of dependent year to year, but it's also based on an evaluation. That's why I suggested earlier that you need to have a defined player performance evaluation metric, like how you go about doing it. If it's vape, if it's G+, if it's whatever, you need to have some sort of metric by which, and there's a lot of off-ball stuff that you can measure with your tracking data as well. And you can get, like when Doyle talked about when they had second spectrum and they could see sprints and they could see a variety of other sort of player movement data that could give you a much better picture of the 99% of the game where they're not touching the ball,
right?
And what they're doing and whether it's effective in helping or would be effective if teammates were finding them, or you know what I mean. There's other ways that you can measure value, and you need to have a clear, concise way about which you're doing it. As much as it does go with the eye test as well. You have coaches and training staff that are with these players every day and can evaluate this effectively. You want a consensus amongst those people, because one person can evaluate a player quite a bit differently than another person can, but still you want to combine all of those things together and to make those decisions.
Different positions, even within the same line, like different, midfielders of different profiles are different to there are different standards by which they're evaluated, and it's more difficult to evaluate some kinds of midfielders than other, right? It's it's maybe more difficult to evaluate if you have 2 central midfielders and a double pivot. If you have a more attacking midfielder, that's a lot easier in some respects to evaluate than the one who plays more of a destroyer role. And so yeah.
I could say that. So that's the thing. It's like I agree with you, but this gets into the same conversation they were having about data and event data. And event data, and I've discussed this before on the podcast, event data is what we call in the business world a trailing indicator of success.
Sure.
A shot happens because 6 other things went right beforehand.
Yeah.
Right? How are you measuring that?
Right.
And a lot of the things in those 6 weren't actual touches of the ball. Right. So it's like, how are you measuring that and getting a clear picture of it? And to your point, the eye test can sometimes give you a misnomer of quality because you're watching the ball. So all of us are watching the ball.
Yep.
As much as we like to say we're not ball watchers, watching what the player. Everybody's watching the ball. It requires an intense amount of willpower and scrutiny to be able to watch one player a whole game.
Yeah.
I mean, scouts do it because it's their job.
Yeah.
They're only there to see one guy, and they almost don't even care what happens in the game. But for the most part, fans are not looking away from the ball to see how a player's doing.
No. That's hard to do.
And so I think that that evaluation can also give you a false read as well. So you need all of it. You need all of that information.
I think it's worth noting that, like, I mean, I love analytics and lean on them as much as not anybody, but almost anybody. But like the fact is that so much of so much of what happens on a soccer field is based on relationships between either two players or a group of players. And so, when we talk about the rapport between a pair of center backs, or the rapport between, a pair of midfielders in a double pivot, or the relationship between, a striker and an attacking midfielder or chance creator, like those are things that are not necessarily always easily measurable, right? They don't necessarily tie in exactly to a set of data. And so, like, I think that that's just worth mentioning, is that that's like a thing too, right? And that the data has a lot of answers, but it doesn't have all the answers.
You can sometimes at some level with passing maps and average positioning see if players are connecting and also creating appropriate space between them and such. But yeah, it requires a lot. It requires a much more critical eye of the data to be able to evaluate it, interpolate it effectively. And that is where you need an analytics department and a player performance department that is actually doing those things.
So that is,
I do not trust an assistant coach on the sideline to make this evaluation. No, I just don't.
There's too much for them to have to look at too.
100%. And also they're not viewing it from high enough to be able to see it. Right.
So the other pillars very quickly that I had were advanced analytics, a player pathway, and then an ability and a willingness.
I get what you're saying now. You had sort of flipped kind of where you
had and a willingness and a ability. I got all tongue twisted. And an ability and a willingness to have top end roster spend when it's called for. I know that's kind of a squishy thing, but
So I think for this example, I think that you have it, and I think that I was going to put this at the top, but let's say if you're the CSO of Sporting Kansas City tomorrow, right? David Lee just like, I can't make this work. I obviously can't figure out how to fucking sign players or fill out a front office, blah, 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 blah. Cody, take over. Let's say you have a 4-year discretionary budget at $10 million a year to spend on transfer fees. And you have all of this, and you can use any salary spend mechanism that exists in the league, GAM, TAM, etc., that's available to you. And on top of that, you get $40 million over 4 years in discretionary transfer fee and above and DP salary spend, right? That would be kind of the baseline expectation. I don't feel like I'm too far off as far as what David Lee has available to him in making that statement. So take that as the baseline when you're saying like ability or the willingness to spend when available.
Yeah. So, the only thing I mean by that is that and this sort of gets into the last question, which is categories of players, and measuring and defining them. Like I think that I think designated players should be attacking players. I think that you should have high-end TAM players on every line, every other line, right? Probably at least a high-end TAM attacker, and then high-end TAM players, at least one in the midfield, at least one in the defensive line, and then maybe even your goalkeeper. I don't know. I hadn't really got that far into thinking about it, but.
What do you think about? What do you think high TAM is? Over $1 million salary budget charge?
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I think that
because right now TAM goes all the way up to 1.8 million. Yeah. So like it's a big it's a lot of money now for a TAM player.
Yeah. And especially in the midfield, I think that is especially attacking midfield spots need to be either DP or high TAM players. I think that as you go, further back towards goal, I think that you can get a little bit looser with that. And, I think that domestic center backs actually usually are a pretty good value. And I would, just sort of like personally, I think that's a good place for Sporting Kansas City to look, and that's where they have looked. And we're rolling into the season with 3 to 4 domestic center backs, and we'll see how it goes. But that's
there's a difference between them being domestic and them being TAM level center backs, right? Those are two separate things.
Absolutely.
And there are plenty of domestic center backs that are TAM level center backs.
And I realize that I'm kind of like working against myself here, but I do think that you should spread out TAM players so that you have a high TAM player in central defense. And as I kind of maybe hinted at earlier, I prioritize the spine, and so I prioritize center backs, defensive midfield, and center forward.
Yeah. You stole mine, but that is definitely a key roster pillar of, like, when we're asking about what our roster pillars are. When I look at my pillars for how I'm building my roster, focus on the spine.
Yeah,
the spine is the most important part of the field. It is where the majority of important actions happen on the field, and it is the place where the worst things can happen if you don't do it effectively, right? So, like, all of the the interesting part of, so I'm with you on all that. I would probably be more on the David Goss side of that conversation regarding center backs. I think most teams don't focus on center back play enough. I think the really good teams that have been successful year on year do focus heavily on center back. FC Cincinnati is a good example of this. I think LAFC is a good example of this. San Diego has done it in their own way. I don't know how they turned Manu Dua into the player they drafted. He was the first pick of the draft last year and has become an elite level center back in the league. I think that, there's a whole conversation to be had. Maybe we have a separate time about what San Diego's doing and how it's working. I thought they were a little high on their own supply last year, and I'm starting to think that maybe they really know what the fuck they're doing.
I don't know. Just because it worked last year does not mean it's like working, right? And so,
they just trashed Pumas 4-1 last night. It's not like 3 weeks out of preseason.
Yeah.
So I think that they're.
I didn't even know you were allowed to have a squad at this time of the year, so
much less trash a Liga MX team 4-1.
I mean, what the fuck?
Yeah,
they're just breaking all the rules.
So anyway, I do think this is a whole separate conversation about San Diego and how they've gone about doing it, but they do have a clear identity and a philosophy, which I do think is relevant to this conversation.
Yeah, I was kind of thinking about them and the fact that, like, both of their, they did not invest heavily in center backs, right? Like their center backs are domestic players or draft picks.
But they have a very specific philosophy about finding undervalued youth.
Yeah.
In the system.
But they also play a high possession system, and so, like, those two things normally you would think that they're at odds, and they aren't necessarily. That's true. I would say no, that's a conversation for a different time. What are your pillars? I'm curious.
So, like I said, focus on the spine. The spine is the most important area to spend money. So if we're talking about DPs and high TAM players, I call a high TAM player anywhere within $500,000 of max TAM. Sure. So we're going to say 1.3 million to 1.8 million in salary budget charge is a high TAM player. So I am focused centrally in that spending. Mm-hmm. I think that is the area of the field where you can get the most value out of that expenditure, assuming that your scouting and your player evaluation and whatnot is correct. Like, we don't need to talk about Nemanja Radoja, but I mean, there are big whiffs that you can make when you make these kinds of signings. Nicolas Samat-Marine, Joaquin Fernandez, there are numerous examples of where this team has failed in the player evaluation side of things when it comes to making these investments. But I do believe that the philosophy towards investing in those positions was correct. Okay. I think the execution was bad. So I need to separate those two things. The other thing is having a clear. So I'm less concerned about specific archetypes of players and more concerned about fitting those players in with each other. And I'm also a little bit less like with the philosophy of kind of the depth of the roster. I understand what Bobby is saying when it comes to focusing your salary budget spending in a small area means that if you're doing it correctly, and generally money does provide quality, right? Like in a general sense, when it comes to soccer players, money spent on salary does provide quality. Assuming that case, if you condense the number of players that you are spending that salary budget on, you can then raise the quality of all of them. So now you have a much denser group of higher quality players than you would if you spread it out more democratically, kind of like what Goss was suggesting. I also think, to Bobby's point, that it creates a structural requirement to playing youth players because you don't have anybody else. So I understand the concepts there.
You mean consolidating your high salaries,
right?
Yeah,
consolidating the majority of your salary budget spend into 13 or 14 players means that you've got a bunch of homegrowns on senior minimums,
right?
That are the rest of your roster, or other supplemental roster players are the rest of your roster. And at that point, you are required to start bringing along youth players to fill in when needed because you don't have any other options. So I feel like
there's a big difference between doing that because you kind of have locked yourself in and that's your only choice, and doing it because like purposefully, right? Like
as a strategy,
right? As a strategy.
Exactly,
yeah.
Right. And I think that's the point that gets missed on the conversation on that podcast is that Bobby doesn't. He understands that he's taking a risk by doing it, but he doesn't actually get to explain how the risk plays out when it's actually a philosophy instead of just what happened.
Yeah.
Right. And so I do understand that at some level. That said, I think that you do want to focus the majority of your roster spending in the players that are playing the majority of the minutes. Sure. I think that it's kind of dumb to have Tim Leibold making $900,000 and playing 1,000 minutes. Like, that's fucking stupid.
It is.
Okay? In a salary cap league, you have to make good use of your resources. So I do understand sort of the efficiency of spending being in the places where you expect players to play regularly. And if there are injuries, so be it, you deal with it. But I do think that there's a secondary part of this where having players that are a little bit more adaptable to different roles is also really important. So if I'm going to spend $1.2 million on a central midfielder, he better be able to play wide midfield. He better be able to play fullback if I need him to. I want MLS Dominic Szoboszlai if I'm spending that money on him, because I'm going to need to move him around the field because I only have 13 or 14 fucking guys that I'm paying big money to. Right. And so I think that there is an aspect to recruiting that is having a more well-rounded player that is a little bit more that is not so reliant on a very specific style of play. And I think you sort of alluded to this before, and that's why you haven't even heard me talk about a style of play.
Right.
Because I think it's more important to have players that can, when coached well enough and drilled well enough about what that coach wants to do, can achieve it. And less about, I'm trying to take this guy with this one elite skill at holding the ball and surround him with people that allow him to only do that one thing. Yeah. I think singularly focused players that are elite at one thing are going away. Like, I just don't think that is a positive way to build a team. You need guys who have skills that cross multiple capabilities.
Well, I think that is applicable across. That's just like a truism in football generally, right? Like Mesut Ozil is not a thing anymore, right? There's no next Mesut Ozil.
Right, but if you look at how Sporting Kansas City's roster is constructed, it's full of a lot of guys that are elite at one or two things and have massive holes elsewhere.
Right. Agree.
So that's the point I'm trying to make, right? I'm trying to fix the problem here.
I want to name names, give examples. What do you mean here?
Well, I mean, the easy one is Shapi Suleimanov, right? Like, obviously,
Okay.
like that is a player that is elite at one thing, and that's hitting the ball with his left foot.
I literally don't consider him to be a real player. Like at this point, I just feel like
we're paying $1 million in salary budget charge.
I realize that, but I literally think of him as an add-on to Manu, and just kind of a he's like the shitty.
But he takes over
you're
like
right.
almost 1/15 of our salary budget.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Or more.
It's crazy.
I don't even know how much of that fee is attributed to him.
It's a bad deal.
It's a bad deal.
Yep.
But like
I was gonna say I kind of think of him as the shitty toy in a Happy Meal at this point. But
let's use Manu as an example. Elite ball progressor.
Yeah.
Kind of interesting last pass hitter, but not really. And more of like an 8 in kind of how he arrives at the box late, but
now remember the radar comp that I sent you last year. Like who was that radar comp? They were almost identical.
I don't even remember who you sent.
It was Rodrigo fucking DePaul, dude.
Rodrigo DePaul.
Like literally, they were the same. They had the same radar. It's crazy, but they don't seem to be the same player at all.
No, they don't. And when I watched Manu Garcia, it's a completely different experience than watching Rodrigo.
Exactly.
But Manu Garcia is useless defensively.
Yes.
Like we can agree with this. He's useless defensively, which is weird for a box-to-box midfielder. Mm-hmm. Right? Dejan Joveljic, ball go in net a lot when he gets touches inside the box. For sure. When he is 40 yards from the box, could you even tell he's on the field?
Not an elite dribbler.
Well, not even that. Does he win aerials? Does he do anything? Does he do anything when he's 40 yards from the goal? No. So, like, there are a lot of these guys with, like, significant gaps in their game. Yeah.
But that is MLS to an extent.
It is
right?
MLS to a certain extent, and I agree with that. And I'm going to talk out of both sides of my mouth a little bit when it comes to the recruitment side of things, because one of the things that the Soccerwise guys discussed was Bobby brought up like some CSOs feel like DPs are the hardest deals to get across the line, so you just have to get them done and then build around them.
Right.
And other CSOs are like, what are you talking about? The DP pool that we play in is huge. Yep. There are a ton of players available.
I'm in that group.
I am too. Yep. I'm the same way. It's like I think there are levels to this, right? Lionel Messi is a different DP than Manu Garcia is, right? Even though they're both DPs, there's difference. And in fairness, like let's take Messi out of the equation. Denny Bouanga, you can't like that is a fucking unicorn DP signing. They bought him for like $5 million from a Ligue 2 team. Yeah. And he has like 30 goal contributions a year for the last 3 years.
You want to share what I texted you about Denny Bouanga today?
that you hope that if he goes to Fluminense that they'd sign Joveljic for $20 million.
Hey man.
Yeah, I mean I would be for it. I would be for it because I think Joveljic's value is probably higher than, or I think his monetary value is higher than his on-field value. Personally, especially in the league, as you noted, but Bouanga,
he has effectively no value on a wooden spoon team,
right? Like, and he's like making him sit on this shitty ass team for another 2 years is not really good for him.
No, it's malpractice.
Right? Yeah, I mean he's cashing that $3 million check every
sure
year. I don't think he's upset about it, but yeah, it's not great. I mean, I would get really sad watching Son Heung-min and Joveljic just banging goals, but I would also be happy for him that he did it. And I'll be happy. Yeah. I'm always happy for Sonny when he's doing good things. But Bouanga is a unicorn, right? So, like, yeah, it's hard to find Denny Bouanga. Sure, of course it is. But most DPs in the league, if you want to look at Hani Mukhtar or Sam Surridge or even Evander or a lot of these players are available to MLS teams with the right amount of with the right check. Yeah. So I don't think that is actually the way you should go about building your roster. I think you should be trying to find DPs that fit a philosophy towards how you want to play. and go from there. And so that is kind of my mind. But I mean, Sporting is in a position where they already have 2 DPs, and it makes and I firmly believe in sticking with the 2-4 roster construction until you are in a place, like you said, in 5 years where you're competing regularly for trophies, and that third DP will get you to the level where you can actually achieve that.
Yeah.
It makes 0 sense to spend money on a third DP unless you're trying to win something.
Or unless you're not going to sign any U22s. And
I mean, I guess, but you're losing that extra gam that you can use in the middle of the roster. I think the middle roster growth, like now you have less than 14 players. Now you have 11 players that you can invest your roster spending on, because
that's about how many players are on the roster now, so it works out.
Right, but we're talking about hypothetically if David Lee leaves and we take over, what we would do.
Yeah.
And I mean, that just realistically, it does. He's right about the fact that it makes sense to stay on 2-4.
It does. Absolutely.
That extra gam is actually more valuable to you as you're rebuilding a squad than it is otherwise.
So we've kind of gone off on a tangent or two. So restate your pillars again.
It is to focus on the spine.
Yep.
It's similar to you in the fact that I'm going to focus on spending through the center of the park specifically, and use wide positions, use youth and domestic players for wide positions. I would invest more heavily in center backs. That's part of the spine. The interesting, and then, like they said, you got to win in the boxes, right? That the whole point of building up the spine is that you are really solid defensively and you have a really good attacking player that can put the ball in the net. Put the ball in the net, keep the opponent from putting the ball in the net. Those are the goals, so you should be spending money in the places that achieve that the most effectively. Now,
you've just kind of described a Spurs squad build where you have all your money on the defensive line and an attack and not shit in the midfield. So just
no, the spine includes the 6.
Okay,
the spine includes the 6.
How many 6s does Spurs have? All of them?
They have a lot of terrible ones. They have a lot of them that do one thing well.
Okay. All right. I just wanted to point that out. That's.
I am aware of how terrible Tottenham is. You don't have to tell me on the podcast they're terrible.
It's amazing to me in this conversation how much each of our conversation is
did at any point in this conversation did I suggest they should spend £200 million on a bunch of 20-year-old wingers? Did I ever say that?
So much of this conversation is defined by our own respective trauma watching our own teams play. It's really hilarious.
That's fair. I'm gonna push down to kind of like the categories here on my side of things, and I'll let you roll because my roster pillars sort of go towards the categories. Okay. So I have 3 main categories of players that I'm looking at. So the first are what I call investment players. Right? So these are your homegrowns that you've invested, development time, academy time, and everything into. And then they are your younger signings that you're hoping to turn for a profit. Make it I don't know how long the U22 thing is going to last, but youth players that you're bringing in that you're trying to develop, turn into something, and then sell on. A huge component of my philosophy towards running a useful front office, as you've heard on this podcast a lot, is the ability to actually create my own revenue so that I can reinvest it in the team.
Yep, me too.
And the key way that you need to be able to do that is to sell players. And where do you get the majority of the profit? It's from your academy and your youth players, developing them, selling them on, as well as your younger players that you bring in for nominal fees, develop them, turn them into key players that other teams want, and sell them on for significant fees. So I call those investment players. These are players with upside financially to you as you're building out your club. Then I call the middle tier sort of the management players, or the hole fillers, so to speak. So these are middle of rosters, quote unquote, veterans, right? Maybe 3 years or so of first team minutes or more. They could potentially be a hole filler where they have an elite skill in an area of need. You don't want to necessarily, like I've said over and over again, you don't want them to be only good at that, but maybe they're capable, like an Andreas Kubas, of like hoovering up literally every ball, Roger Espinoza style, right? You need someone like that in your midfield because you just don't have those guys. This is a player you can bring in. Typically, their G plus vape, whatever player performance metric you're looking at, is at least at average level, if not slightly above average, right? And so these are players that you're generally targeting right around the budget max, which will be when you start needing to use allocation money down to kind of the 400K range. So let's call it the 400 to 800K salary budget range. These are players you expect to contribute, have a positive G plus vape, whatever it is, and they can fill an area of need based on the construction of your roster. And then you have what I call the on-field ceiling raisers. These players are the ones that, with their quality, make your team better. They allow you to get that extra 0.1 XG per game through their own play that increase your chances of winning. These are obviously DPs. These are obviously big TAM signings, generally going to be generally going to be over the age of 24, 25. Not necessarily areas, maybe Denny Bwanga you sell when he's 31 for $15 million and make a profit on him. But rarely are these players that you're selling on for a profit. They're players you're investing in to get quality on the field. So your return on your investment is XG. It's not future transfer fee.
Sure.
And so those are DPs, big TAM. And the last bullet I wrote when it came to this was something that I really thought was interesting that Goss highlighted when it comes to signing these players and the dynamics of these players in the locker room. Identifying guys who are willing to be leaders of the team when you sign them. Because according to Warshaw, it seemed to be the guys with the big salaries were the ones that people looked at as the guys that were supposed to be leading.
Right.
And if they weren't leading, it was negative. It was like a problem in the locker room. So being able to identify that as well.
Omar Bravo, baby.
I don't know that is the most important characteristic. Like, I don't know what kind of leader Dejan Joveljic is in the locker room. He doesn't seem like a guy who's like overt externally that much. Like, he's a pretty quiet dude. But
is his salary the highest on the team?
It is.
Okay.
Yeah. So I think, Manu Garcia is the same way. These don't seem like guys who are really like vocal leaders. Daniel Shalhoub is the vocal leader on the team. So there's something to be said, like how big of a deal that is and, how well the coach manages that situation. But it is something to be at least keeping an eye on. And then, we get into the whole roster size conversation. I do take issue with one thing that Bobby said. He was like, well, we can come up with the right performance management program to make sure the guys don't get injured. Sure, Jan.
You can think that going in, but like shit always goes sideways, right? And if you got, that sounds like a pro soccer player that didn't have many injury issues in his career and thinks that because he did something with his body, that's why it happened. And unfortunately, we know way too much about physiodynamics and like genetics for that to be the case. Gio Reyna doesn't keep getting hurt all the time because he has bad training. Like, that's not why it's happening. They can. Josie Altidore, remember he had all the hamstring injuries, and in Toronto they did figure out like a way to mitigate them, but he'd still get them. Right.
Some of this is genetics and physique.
Yep, absolutely.
And you just have to be aware of that, and maybe there are ways that you can avoid it by looking at history and who you're signing for sure, but expecting the sports science department to enable you to have a short roster, I don't believe is real. But I do think that there are ways for you to augment if you're doing the homegrown pathway effectively. So I've said a lot of talking now. What are your sort of categories, and then how are you defining and measuring their success? Oh, I do want to say one last thing.
Yeah.
When it comes to the on-field ceiling raisers, I kind of went across this. My player performance metric of these players needs to be a significant over the average type of player. Like, if I'm looking at their heat map and key areas for a player of that position, so if I got a striker, I'm looking at his non-penalty XG, his XA, his shots in the box, all of that. All of those, if that's one of my ceiling raiser players, needs to be well into the 75th plus percentile in all of those categories.
Right.
That's how I'm looking at measuring that.
So, and I, when I was a lot less sort of like hard numbers based when I thought about this, no surprise there. But I did sort of account for that kind of thing in building roster churn into my pillars. In that if you're not performing, then you can move on, right? And if you're if you're a wing back and I've decided with the coaching staff that you're supposed to reach X amount of expected assists in the season, and you're falling short of that, then you will transition to either the bench or off of the squad kind of deal. And so that's the roster churn. That's part of what the roster churn is meant to be, is sort of an incentivizer. And I otherwise, I think that my roster sort of tiers or categories are really similar to yours. I also prioritize developmental players as backups. I understand sort of like philosophically, I understand the importance, I guess, of veteran backups like Memo Rodriguez, for instance. But I don't know. I'm just not sold on how valuable those players actually are. I would rather backup spots go to players that are developmental players with again that sort of roster churn hanging over in the background, that those players, when they get the chance, if they don't perform, they're going to be moving on. And so and if they do perform, they'll be rewarded with more minutes. And so really, it's sort of like it truly, when I thought about it, it truly branched into tiers like sort of developmental, that middle of the roster, and then the high end roster, which I think is pretty normal from what you would expect from just about any roster, honestly. And so
I think that's true, and I want to be clear about part of the reason why I have the defined metrics for measurement.
Yeah.
Because I do think that you need to be constantly evaluating. So as a CSO, you need to constantly be evaluating your roster, to your point, for the inevitable need for turnover.
Right.
And you need to be evaluating if your investments are meeting efficiency thresholds from a cash flow perspective. So if I'm spending $1 million in salary budget on this player, is that player giving me the return on that investment on the field necessary? So I need to have ways to measure that.
Right.
And there needs to be a player performance measurement that I'm using that helps give me. Now, granted, if the player performance measurement shows negative, but the coaches are like, well, I don't necessarily agree with that. Well, let's look deeper as to why it's negative. Maybe it's very negative in one area that's causing the overall grade to look poor, and it's actually and there are circumstances that are creating that. I think that I don't think it's as simple as A, B, C, D, or F.
Right. If you're
gone.
If
right?
your goalkeeper's metrics are negative, but that goalkeeper never plays with starting caliber center backs, that has to be taken into consideration.
There's context there, but there's also context related to in the opposite direction. Andreu Fontas used to look great on G+. He looked like a guy that would literally based on G+, was worth 3 to 4 points a season.
All his passes were progressive. It makes sense.
But he was really, really good at one thing that made his G+ look really good. And he was not as good at a lot of other things. Some of them were even negative. And so it sort of offset the measurement a little bit. Mm-hmm. And so you do have to look a little bit deeper, and you do have to use data and your eyes at the same time, so you're not being given a head fake. But I think that it should give you a place by which you initially go, hey, is this the right player for this position? We need to discuss this further.
Right.
Let me get the head coach in here. Let me get my player performance staff in here. Let's take a look at this deeper and go, is this an opportunity for us to upgrade? Can we move this guy on and get a different player in that might actually give us more value for the investment that we're making? You have to be programmatically thinking in that way.
Yep.
You have to constantly be thinking in that way. And it doesn't need to be as metric based as what I'm doing. Like I'm a data and a math guy, so I'm going to look at it in that way. While also, as you've heard me say on this podcast over and over again, challenging the data to make sure that it's giving me the information, that's giving me a correct picture, and it's not just a correlation that just happened to sort of connect. It's not a coincidence. Challenge the data, but use it. Use it to help identify where you need to look, and then challenge it if it's incorrect. Those two things can exist at the same time.
Absolutely.
But I think that it's important to have that so that you know where you can more quickly identify your areas of need. It's really important to be able to do that and be able to move quickly. Like that, if you're going to ask if I was a CSO of this club, especially based on how things have been happening so far, I want to have a structure in place that allows me to act quickly when I need to.
Right.
That allows me when it comes to moving on from a player that is causing us to not be successful, as well as bring in a player that could add a significant amount of success. I want to be able to make those decisions at the speed of when they're available.
Yeah. Like I said, this conversation is informed by our our respective and shared trauma in talking about this team. And so, like, I know that I thought a lot about the way that Peter Burmese teams were constructed in thinking about this, and I know that you did the same. And I think both of us probably made an effort not to be sort of solely reactive in the way that we approach things. Now all we need is players to evaluate.
Yeah, because all we're able to evaluate right now is how to build the team, because the team doesn't exist, right? We can discuss how we do it, but we are left waiting to see how that's actually going to play out. And I do believe that David Lee is a person who thinks probably pretty closely to how I've framed out my thought process. I need to see it in action. And granted, it may not fully get into action until he's able to hire all the people necessary.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. Is that I think more to the point, and given the current context, like what do you do when what's your plan B, your plan C, your plan C? What do you do when you can't execute plan A for one reason or another, right? Because
hopefully you have enough of a scouting staff and a sporting staff.
What do you do when you don't, right? Because that's kind of where Sporting Kansas City appears to be. Is like they don't have that built out staff, and so like we can make these plans and looking at like this is where it should be next year, but what are they going to do in the next 2 weeks? Because really that's where we are.
Well, and I think that's why, to tie it all back to the kvetching we did at the beginning of this podcast, that's why we think that this is going to be such a shit sandwich this year.
Because there's no easy way out.
Realistically, we don't see a way for them to actually like functionally do this, because we just spent an hour and 30 minutes talking about how we'd go about building out a roster. It includes a lot of shit Sporting doesn't have.
Yeah, that's true.
If anything should put a finer point on how behind this club is right now of being able to achieve the things that we want to see them achieve, it should have been the hour and a half we just spent talking about all the things that need to be in place to be able to build a successful team and how few of them they have currently.
Yeah.
And I do believe that Lee is trying to build this framework and will have a lot of these components in place. It's just impossible for them to all be there right now. Yeah. And in the meantime, he's trying to build a team, and reasonable people can disagree about this. And as a fan of soccer, I don't want to watch a shitty team on the field, so I sort of disagree with it from that perspective. But reasonably, is it a good idea for him to make decisions right now based on the limited amount of information he has? Like, should he be making decisions on contracts for players for 2 to 3 years right now?
Well, no, and this is why he's
probably not.
This is why he's signing journeyman, trialists, right? I mean, that's the smart play.
It is.
Like it or not.
If you want this team, actually,
it's the only play.
if you actually want this team to be good in a shorter period of time, you might actually have to eat this shit sandwich.
Yeah.
For that otherwise he could create more problems than he fixes.
Yep. That's not what we want.
It's the very end of the podcast. Bobby sort of left on a note that I think is important. That sort of wraps all of this up, and will be a good place for us to stop. This framework is integral to how you go about building your soccer team. You need the framework to make good decisions.
Yeah.
It helps give you those guardrails of like what you want to accomplish. And you can sort of, does this decision fit in line with what I've put together here? He doesn't have those guardrails right now.
Yeah.
And the most important decisions, and Bobby talked about this, the most important decisions are made on the margins where you're kind of unsure and you can go back to your values and go, does this fit within what I said I wanted to do? Those are the places where you can get yourself in trouble. And Sporting can't afford to put themselves in more trouble right now.
That's right. You have to have a plan in order to deviate from it, And
it's hard to have a plan when there's 3 guys in the front office.
It's true. In the meantime, we have Argentina, Netherlands, Algeria, Spain.
And England.
Or sorry, not Spain, England, obviously.
England.
Duh. And then we also have Chris Armas. So lucky us.
Woo! Man, we went from high to low really quickly. And on that note, I'm Drew. He's Cody. We will talk to y'all next week.
Bye-bye.